Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Systems of oppression fueled by hate, held up by a lie we can't escape. Humanity, a history of tragedy. Does it have to be the future of us all? Hear our prayer, hear your people, turn our hearts to you, make us whole again. Hear our prayer, hear your people, turn our hearts to you, make us one. Power, struggles, fear, and shame. Will the story always be the same? Will we ever be the people we are meant to be? Does this have to be the future of us all? Hear our prayer, hear your people, turn our hearts to you, make us whole again. Hear our prayer, hear your people, turn our hearts to you, make us one. Hear our prayer, hear your Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter, springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, joined with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth. Thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Good morning, Crosspointe. Thank you for joining us this morning. I also hope that you'll join us next Sunday morning, either here online or at our November in-person service in the Crosspointe parking lot. We've moved the time of our service from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. with the hope that having it a little bit later will allow for slightly warmer temperatures. It is a joy to be together as a community in person. We want to remind you that you're going to want to bring a camp chair for that in-person experience. Also, don't forget that our children and middle school students will gather on the backside of the building for their own age-appropriate ministry experiences. Check-in will open for children and students beginning at 10:30 a.m. So if you know that you will be checking in your child, we encourage you to get there a little bit early in order to allow enough time for that. Also though, if you get there early, you get dibs on the snacks. So in addition to next Sunday, we've got another exciting opportunity to come together as a community. this time for an evening of music. Mark your calendar for the evening of Saturday, November 20th. We've invited Denver-based singer-songwriter Spencer LaJoy to put on a concert in the courtyard. Now, you might remember several months ago on a Sunday morning service, we shared Spencer's song entitled Plowshare Prayer.
I pray that you feel you are worth never leaving. I pray that you know I will always believe you. I pray that you're heard.
This song is so powerful for many reasons. Not the least of them is that Spencer identifies as transgender non-binary. In the sharing of their music, we're blessed by being opened to entire perspectives of the human experience that have long been silenced, particularly for trans folks in a church context. In addition to that, you can hear in Spencer's music that they have an incredible way of speaking to the core of our shared human experience in a way that is meaningful and moving. So we're excited to experience Spencer's music live. Not to mention, our own Stephen Claybrook will be opening for Spencer. Stephen will be sharing his original music as well, which is an incredible treat. You'll want to keep an eye on your email this Wednesday. In our e-news, we'll have a link available for you to grab your ticket. And I'm sure that this will be an evening of wonderful music that will be a gift to our community. As usual, there is a lot going on in our community. This month, Kids Point is collecting non-perishable food to support the Point Pantry. A list of needed items is available at crosspoint.org/kidspoint-food-drive. Children can bring donations with them to any Kids Point Live in the month of November. We will also be accepting donations at the in-person service next Sunday. Parents, this is an excellent way to get your child involved in giving to those in need. It is a joy to get to continue to be in community with you, Crosspointe, and there are lots of ways that you can participate in what this community is up to. One of those ways is through financial contributions. You can give through stocks, PayPal, mail-in checks, or debit cards. To do that, you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute, or you can text Crosspointe NC to 77977, and it will send a link directly to your phone, and you can choose there how you would like to contribute.
Good morning, my friends. Good to be seen by you today. We are continuing our series, True Fictions, where we're discussing Jesus's parables, and not just his parables, but even the tradition of using parables to teach or point to deeper truths. And today is a twofer, two parables, parables. Both of them are somewhat intense. Maybe a little warning there. Well, frankly, all the parables have an intensity to them. It's sort of like the gospel writers were like, we only have so much ink and papyrus, so let's leave the easy breezy ones out. But these two are no exception to the intensity rating. It's heavy stuff. So here's the first parable I want to cover today. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, the 13th chapter. And Jesus has, to this point, already said that the kingdom of heaven, he's talking about the kingdom of heaven, which is a metaphor itself, describing the way where the way that we live is, spirit-led rather than a domination system like empire or human self-interest run amok. The kingdom of heaven, he says, it's like treasure contained in a field, and a guy sells everything because he understands he's going to buy both treasure and field. They come together. And then there's a parable right after that where he says the kingdom is like a pearl merchant who finally finds the one, gives up everything so that he can own it. And then this third parable is on the tail end of those two. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into the baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, yes. So in this story, in this fable, he says that the reign of the divine plays out sort of like a big fisherman's net, catches any and all fish indiscriminately. But then the fishermen start sorting, And the criteria they're using isn't spelled out, but the fishermen have an understood standard by which some fish are good and some fish are bad. And as a fisherman myself, I can say that this only seems to make sense in terms of eating fish. Otherwise, in what way is a fish bad? And then he says, this is a parable of how it will be at the completion of the era, that angels are going to come do this sorting. But now it's not just good and bad, it's evil and righteous, different set of metrics than you would use for seafood. And instead of a basket, there's a furnace of fire, which in the real world was used for purification of metals, sometimes baking. And so this is a really important point because a furnace isn't for torture. What kind of psycho would put people in a smelting device or a cooking utensil and then call their victim evil and themselves righteous for doing so? That doesn't make any sense. So this is a picture of being cast out like bad or immature fish who thought they were the prize catch, but they're not ready. This is a picture of people finding out they've got a lot of refining left to achieve. People who thought that they were, in, but are cast out to weep and gnash their teeth, which that language comes from Psalms and Lamentations. So weeping and gnashing your teeth, that's not describing a reaction to pain. That's anguish. That's mockery of the outsider looking in. You think you're in, but you're the outsider looking in. And then Jesus says, have you understood all this? Which is like him saying, do you know what I mean? Like asking, are you paying attention to what I'm actually saying? And they said, yes, yeah, I think we're tracking. But what if we're moving too fast? And what if I'm misrepresenting things here? Because doesn't Jesus speak the parable, the fish and net part, and then decode it, the angels and furnace part? As in, the angels are the fishermen, the evil and righteous people, those are the fish, good and bad fish. Isn't this a parable that comes coupled with its own literal interpretation? Well, so let's assume that's the case for a second and make some observations out of that assumption. One, in the first part of it, good fish go into baskets, bad fish are thrown out. Well, where do you throw bad fish? It doesn't say that they're turned into bait. It doesn't say that they're tortured, that anybody's taking revenge on them for being inedible fish. It says they're thrown out. So if you're standing on a shore, where do you throw fish that you don't intend to eat? Back. Catch and release. The good fish are put in a basket. For what? Well, for eating, for going on the market. What else makes you good or not? So this can almost be read, if you read it literally, as it turns out bad for the good, but pretty good for the bad. But you have to remember it's a picture, and it's a picture that has two sides. The second part has to correspond with the first. And it emphasizes pretty colorfully that to be good is to serve the benefit of others' lives and their ability to make a living. And to be bad is to be put back where you were, like a fisherman throwing back inedible or undersized, juvenile, immature fish. He's saying divine messengers will also be making a distinction, who gives life, who blesses life, and who just aren't ready yet. Evil and righteousness doesn't have some easy dividing line of people who sin and don't sin, because who doesn't sin? Righteousness is a picture of whether or not you bless others' lives, or do you just take up space and bless yourself? I mean, think about it. Where is that line where somebody would cross from evil to righteous, or righteous enough? What would be that threshold? And so maybe right here you know to insert a theological idea. You know how to say, well, it's Jesus that's alone who is righteous. And so a Christian is someone who accepts Jesus' righteousness for us, provided for us, which is great. Just be careful with that. Righteousness isn't a sticker Jesus gives you for saying the sinner's prayer or arriving at the right conclusions. Plenty of people who love Jesus are inedible, as it were. They live unrighteous lives. Christ-like, that's our standard, means like Christ, not simply I like Christ. So it's living and blessing like Jesus in your own context. That's what we're lifting up. And I don't speak the old languages. And so I want to be careful and respectful when I analyze the ancient words translated into English, but doing so can be really, really helpful in broadening our understanding of what we're reading in these old texts. The word righteous here in Greek is dikaios, or in the ancient Hebrew, tzedek. And these words in Jesus's vocabulary, they're not virtues, they're not badges that he passes out for those who, ace the Bible test. It means to be in right standing with your community, with the people your life affects and is affected by. The Hebrew word tzedek is the same word in the Bible translated almsgiving. Like if you come across a human being trapped in poverty and they need somebody of means to help them out of that poverty trap, to give that person money, to give them relief, that's tzedek. That's righteousness. It is a righteousness to help the vulnerable, to work to remove systems that exploit those vulnerabilities, that press down on them and keep them poor. That's righteousness. In an ancient Jewish court setting, righteousness means that you have been found by a judge to be living or behaving toward others in accordance with Jewish laws, the laws of Moses. That's righteousness. And it also means that the judge is judging fairly and equitably by that same standard, by that same law. So again, it's not an abstract doctrinal state to be argued, between church denominations, like how is it achieved and how much water must be in your baptism in order to receive it, or those kinds of things. Righteousness is a measure of our being people who do rightly, who treat others lovingly and justly, who speak and act honestly, who refuse to assert ourselves violently or inconsiderately. It's not a measure of the bad or naughty things we've avoided. It's ways that we participate in right-making and blessing our friends and our neighbors and our enemies like Christ-like. That's righteousness. You get the sense of this from some translations that in this very Matthew 13 passage, they use the word just instead of righteousness, and they do it in other places that use the same word. Sometimes translators who are trying to convey the truest sense of the word will use the English word just instead, which is interesting for those of us that think somebody could be self-righteous, because how in the world could you be self-just? Just requires a standard outside yourself. Like kindness, I can't say I'm kind. That's not my call. Ultimately, that's your call, whether or not I'm kind. And I think this helps us get at the intent of Jesus' parable. At the end of the era, bad actors and good actors are going to be made distinguishable. Because sometimes you can confuse them, because they both have Bibles and they both use God talk and moralizing and finger pointing, and they sing the same songs and celebrate the same holidays. But the distinction will be whether or not the person is fair, whether they're observably loving and just and equitable and trustworthy and committed to the valuing of all other human lives, all other lives, whether they're committed to whatever is within their reach to dismantle the systems that cheapen human dignity. Just people seek to make love a verb in every way that they can with everybody that they're able to. So now, even with the definition of righteousness cleared up a little, there's still another way of turning it into something problematic. Because we can say, got it. Righteousness is a measure of the good I do for other people and for the way of Christ. It's not simply believing the right things and coming to the right conclusions about what the Bible says or doesn't say, or and then of course removing cuss words as I go or whatever. Got it. That's righteousness. There's still another part of us that must be addressed when we're talking about righteousness, or the problems will persist. So let me get to the second parable now from the 18th chapter of Luke. It says that Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. So that's the preamble. Before we plunge all the way in, let's pay attention to who Jesus is telling this parable to. He's telling it to people who trust in themselves, who've made up their own righteousness. They use their own standards to judge themselves, regardless of how false that might prove to be in other people's eyes. These are people who seem perfectly capable of reaching their own standards of righteousness, but somehow find others completely incapable of living up to those standards. And I'm betting you know the type. And if you do, if you're imagining somebody right now, hold the image of them, especially if it's you, gently in your mind as you listen to the parable that follows this setup. Jesus says, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, a respected Jewish leader whose whole identity is basically explaining the will of God, and the other, a tax collector, another seemingly polar opposite identity that's rooted in the work of really, extracting cash from people for the exchange of peace and security, belonging to Rome, all that good stuff. Which I think is interesting. Jesus is telling a story, and these are two public roles. It's not just two people with names, they're two positions more than they're just two humans. And they seem like social opposites, and perhaps they are, but in a way, if we apply a little horseshoe theory, what seems like opposites actually is, they're actually pretty similar. They're more similar than they realize. So Jesus chooses these two polarities and says, the Pharisee standing by himself in the temple was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves and rogues and adulterers, or even like this guy, the tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income, blah, 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 blah. But the tax collector, standing far off, wouldn't even look up to heaven. He's hanging his head because sometimes self-awareness makes your skull heavier, but instead was beating his breast. It's a sign of remorse. And he was saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, Jesus finishes, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. So remember, this is told to people who think they're righteous compared to others, and they hold those others in contempt. So let's not focus too much on the second guy. I don't think he's the point. If we focus too much on the second guy, we're going to be tempted to think that what God wants, what good religion looks like, is to call yourself an unworthy wretch. Lots of Christians do this. They've been doing it for years and years. It's like performative shame that they think makes God happy. That, if we ever get proud of ourselves or feel positively, God starts to get tense. That's not humility. That's not what humble means. And it's not psychologically healthy for a father to arrange that sort of a framework for his children. And so we should not be using it. The person in Jesus' crosshairs, being shocked awake here, is the Pharisee, or all those that the Pharisee represents. So before you and I exempt ourselves, bear in mind that it only requires us to believe that we're the good guys, the clean and the pure and the right. Everybody else, they're the bad guys. That's all it takes for us to be included in what, Pharisee represents here. Jesus is calling out this mythical comparative righteousness. But remember, righteousness is right-making. And if we are making things right, but we're still clinging to these illusions of superiority, of clean and unclean, us and them, pure and trash, then our righteousness is filthy rags. Our right-making is outshined by our continued world ruining. We're still not justified. That's the word, dikaios. It's the same word. We're still not righteous. We're still not just, because we are still living in the cheap little kingdom of rank and position and relative value. So the parable is meant to shock assumptions by saying, in this story, the guy that you think ruins everything, the tax collector, he's actually not as ruinous as the Bible quoter who thinks she's better than someone else. Why? How could that be? Because superiority and inferiority are rooted in a belief that human worth is tied to what we produce. I mean, how in the world can we heal the world when we need it to be broken in order to remain superior in it? If you insist on an identity of being better, you tend to make the world worse. So let's talk for just a few moments about comparison. There are scientific data that suggests the average human being's thought life is about 10% comparison. If you think 10 thoughts, one or more of those thoughts will have something to do with you comparing yourself in some way to someone else and them to you, and how do you each size up. Some of us do it way more than that, miserably much more than that. But before we judge it as good or bad, let's admit that it might just be a feature of how our brains work. We might be made and programmed to do that because there are a lot of benefits in doing it. Comparing isn't inherently bad. comparing by what sociologists refer to as upward, or making upward comparisons, it serves a huge role in how we get inspired and motivated. Sometimes upward comparisons can be awful, sure, that that person is prettier or richer or more successful or smarter or more lovable in my society. Plenty of stories each of us we could tell about comparing ourselves with someone we think is ranked higher in some way, and it defeats us. But just as often, it can motivate us. That person is stronger, and I can do what they did to get strong, so I'm going to. That person achieved this, and I can follow that same path, and I can achieve it too, or my version of it. It can light a fire in us to expand ourselves, improve ourselves. But here's the thing about upward comparison. You sort of have to see yourself in the person you're comparing yourself to. For instance, like somebody like Elon Musk would likely be ranked in this society as much higher than me. I'm not talking about innate human value. Everybody's equal, right? I just mean he's richer a little bit. He's more visionary. He's more pragmatic. He's more willing to take risks. He's just really smart. He's a lot. Well, I don't envy him. I spend exactly 0 time comparing myself to him, outside of the fact that I just did, trying to show you that there's just no comparison. So I don't compare myself to him or feel, subsequently motivated by him, because I generally don't see my interests in his. I mean, yes, going to Mars, that's great. I'd be willing to sit down and have a beer or two with Elon Musk about that, fine. Overall, I don't really see any Steve-ness in Elon. I just don't. His world is not something I long to be part of or achieve. And maybe he is somebody that inspires you and motivates you, but just not me. But man, oh man, there are some writers out there, some artists, some makers of different things and different genres that make me just want to pound the table and say, dang it, that's brilliant. I got to get my stuff together and do that and make something like that. Why? Because it's motivating. It's not totally alien to me. I can see myself and my interests on some level, and seeing it makes me want to climb. It makes me want to lean in. It motivates me because I can see myself in it. So what about downward comparisons, where you look down on someone's life or decisions or indecisions or their beliefs or whatever, and you say, how could you be so stupid or reckless or gross or wrong? I am so glad I am not you. I'm glad I'm not capable of being you. What our mind is doing in this case is playing a trick where we pretend not to see ourselves. We highlight only the things that seem totally, other. And we nurture the illusion that they are something other or less than ourselves. So we can pinpoint plenty of bits of ourselves in the elite or special folks when we're, doing our motivating upward comparisons. But there's just nothing of ourselves to be recognized in those beneath us. I mean, I could never. I wouldn't be caught dead. Often we'll use disgust terminology to really drive home the gulf that we think is between us. Those people are scum. They're trash. They make me want to puke. That's liberal garbage. That's conservative rubbish. Filth is a popular invective recently. But the whole reason we're making a downward comparison in the first place is because we fundamentally know, even if we don't know that we know, we fundamentally know that we're not that far apart. Why else would we be making a comparison? I mean, do you feel superior to a pigeon on a sidewalk? Of course not. So the voice in our head that might feel superior to a human being on that sidewalk, begging, that part of us that feels superior to them in our hard work, our smart choices, our more managed addictions, our better pedigree, whatever. That part of us that feels superior to somebody whose lives are lived in a completely different way. The part of us that feels superior to those whose goals or outlook or their interests we've been taught is just stupid or wasteful or is just an agenda. That part of us that feels superior to others whose mistakes or just their differences, they work sort of like a social ball and chain. And we, in our superiority, can't really offer more than, well, just be more like me and things would be easier. All we are doing when we do this is nurturing the sense, when we nurture the sense of superiority, all we're doing is subtly admitting that we see siblings. that there's part of us intensely aware of our sameness underneath the illusion of difference. And so we immediately have to not see it in order to maintain the illusion of superiority. See, the Pharisee in the temple looks over and sees himself a little bit, panics, and immediately starts unseeing himself. I mean, how else is he going to remain supreme? And Jesus says, I don't care what other boxes you check, what you accomplish, what temptations you resist, how much Bible you know, etc., etc. Your belief that you are better, or even truly other than someone else, disqualifies you from being found righteous or justified, because those words describe people who heal gaps, who heal hierarchies, not those who use God to defend them. I can say with a fair amount of finality, those of us who want to be and seek to be found as righteous probably aren't. There's just something inherently problematic about seeking and trying to earn titles like that. It just doesn't work out. But those of us unconcerned with being righteous, we're concerned with theological stickers, like whether or not we're righteous or just, but instead what we're doing is we're just answering the gentle moment-to-moment voice of God in our living to be a fellow right maker, kind and loving and fair, a world healer best I can in each scene I'm in. Those are the people who tend to go home justified. And the little part of us that needs this to be more complicated than that, needs it to be a little more theologically tangled up than that, that's very likely the part of us that wants to thumb over at the others in the temple and go, they haven't figured it out. Thank God I have. And I think that's immature fish. I think that's bad fish. I think that's the long, empty walk home. It's the hollow religion that can quote the Bible backward and forward, but it wonders quietly to itself, what's the point? And I think a way out is to stop worrying whether or not we're more or less right or good or biblically astute or politically well-aligned or even righteous, to stop putting so much energy into those things, because that's energy expended on managing our own identity, our own standing, and instead realize how important and sacred and beautiful it is to wake up every day and pray something like this. God, how can my living be found just today? How can I heal more than I wound today in every interaction I'll have? God, how can I, for all my flaws and for all I am wrong about and for all I can't possibly get right, still be part of what you are up to in this world? Help me disbelieve the destructive illusion of separateness. Help me to see myself and those around me today, because I am. And help make it so others see you in me today, because you are. Amen. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.